So a week ago I got back from my airline's operator proficiency check, which is a sim check program. The last thing I need to do before I go flying in the 737 MAX, only to discover that my landings were rubbish. So this is one thing that caught me out, and today I want to talk about how this situation occurred, how it developed, how it snuck up on me, and what I've done to sort out my landings since then. So welcome back everyone, and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Matt. I'm a former Australian Navy and Air Force pilot. I flew choppers in the Australian Navy and heavy jets in the Royal Australian Air Force. And now I'm flying the 737 MAX with a new Australian airline. So in this video, I want to give you some insights into how I got in that situation, how this snuck up on me, and what I've done to correct my preparation and my landing technique itself. So the background of my training here on the 737 MAX was December last year. I went over to Gatwick in London, learned to fly the 737 on the type rating course, and then I spent about 6 weeks at home waiting for my conversion training to start here with my airline before I spent 5 days in a simulator in Fiji. In total there was 27 simulator events and a lot of opportunities to fly the aircraft, but not a lot of focus, not a lot of instruction on landing itself. So I think there's a few things that led to this situation, and the first of which is the aircraft type that I've come from is quite distinct, quite different from the 737. So C-17, like a lot of large wide bodies, is a much larger aircraft, a much higher aircraft. So from the pilot's seating position on short final approaching the runway, the visual picture in the runway itself just looks different. This means when we're going to start the flare, when we're going to start raising the attitude, is going to be quite different from a smaller aircraft like a 737. The other factor there is the heads-up display. So the C-17 was designed really to get large amounts of cargo and payload into combat airfields. So for that reason, it needed to be landed very accurately, and the heads-up display was part of that system, which enabled pilots to do that. Now, my version of the 737 that I'm flying doesn't come with a HUD, so it's back to basic visual techniques, using the runway itself and using a visual glide slope system, whether that's a VASI or a PAPI system. The other thing about the C-17 was that it's designed with a pitch hold function, and it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's known as PACA, or pitch, attitude, command, attitude, hold. What that means is when you're on final to land the aircraft, a couple of 100 feet above the runway, you can lock in the attitude of the aircraft, and then it effectively becomes an angle of attack approach, meaning the aircraft's pitch attitude is locked in, and so is the airspeed. Then the pilot can focus on adjusting the aim point and where the aircraft will touch down using thrust. So a great system, again, it enables the pilot to land it very, very accurately, but not something that comes fitted to the 737. Now the second point here for me, I think, which I alluded to, was that there was no formal instruction or really syllabus items on flare technique or finals technique. This is something also that my airline didn't spend much time on. So for people coming from a similar aircraft type, it's fair to expect they'll come across and use the skills they have. For me, it requires a bit more effort and a bit more focus. Which brings me to the third point, and that's effort areas. Now, I talked about this in a previous video about things I would have done differently on the type rating. And one thing here, which is still lacking clearly, is effort area in this particular part of my flying technique. So the type rating itself, and in particular, this operator check phase, where I've been checked by senior check captains with my airline, requires a pilot to focus on a lot of different skills, a lot of different attributes about flying the aircraft. So for me, a big focus was flying the instrument approach procedures, whether that was 3D and precision approach or 2D non-precision approach, in the correct manner. So using the automation system in exactly the right way, making sure it's safe and stable throughout the approach, and then moving on to be able to handle emergencies. In particular, engine failures during final approach, and making sure I could handle that down to the minimum, and then either land the aircraft or carry out a missed approach. So a lot of effort went into that, a lot of effort went into the instrument approaches themselves, and I didn't actually prioritize the landing technique and going into that at all. The big issue for me really was coming out of an instrument approach, whether that's an ILS or a VNAV or a VOR approach, disconnecting automation and just being unable to lock in a stable glide path and being unable to lock in a stable center line. So my airspeed was fine, but the approach wasn't stable, and they certainly weren't getting better over time. All right, so what have I done to correct my technique and improve my ability to land the 737? Now, given the technique for landing the C-17 was so much different, I've picked up a technique really going back to my PC9 days, which is a work cycle, attitude, aim point, airspeed, center line. So the work cycle just enables me to focus on each of those, the pitch attitude of the aircraft on the PFD, the aim point or the part of the runway which isn't moving in the windscreen, which is fixed and stationary, and where the aircraft will impact the ground if I do nothing. The airspeed, as indicated on the primary flight display, and lastly the center line. So each time I call out one of those values, attitude, aim point, airspeed, center line, I'm just checking to see if the value is where I want it to be, which means errors aren't going undetected, they're not getting away from me, they're not getting worse because I'm focusing on each particular parameter at a time. So that was the big breakthrough for me using that particular work cycle, and how I applied that was first through visualization. I applied that by using my trusty cardboard cutout, and also when I was away in hotels getting ready for flying by using my laptop and just a PDF screenshot of the PFD. Now, given I do have 27 sims under my belt, I'm now getting to the point where I can actually visualize in my head what the PFD looks like. I can conjure up that image and I can make the adjustments without having to look at a separate diagram or a separate template. And importantly, rehearsing not just a stable approach, but small variations and errors to centerline, to airspeed, to aim point, and then making those corrections. That's really built in the skill where I can then take that and use that in the aircraft. And since coming back from Fiji, I have had a couple of flights in the aircraft with the training captain. My first few back in an aircraft since 2019, and it's worked quite well. So definitely making some progress there. Taking on board clearly the feedback and guidance of my training captain and really focusing on the areas I need to pick up. So the final takeaway from this for me is just maintaining awareness of anything that I'm putting on the shelf for later on. Landings were something that were not progressing particularly well early in my type rating course in the UK. At the time I was satisfied with it, it was good enough, but it's something I didn't pick up until getting a poor rating on my operator conversion training. Clearly I focused on other parts of the assessment criteria and that went well for me, but this is something I did park on the back bench that I could have put more effort into, and now I've had to pick it up and do just that. So that's where my landings are at in the 737. In terms of the training generally for me, I've now completed 2 days line training, which involves 2 sectors each day. The first was back down to Melbourne, up to Cairns, Victoria and back, Queensland back up to Cairns, and I'm just loving being back in the air, being back in the saddle, and using all those skills that were so hard learned in the military. Never thought I'd enjoy it this much, never thought it'd be such a big thing for me, but it just goes to show how deeply etched in my persona flying is. So loving it so far and looking forward to finishing up my line training and getting out there in about 3 weeks' time. So that's it for today. That's my 737 landing story, and that's where I'm at with my training. If you've had any experiences where you've had to put specific effort into lifting your game and your technique on any part of your flying skills, I'd love to hear about it. Comment below. Otherwise, look out for my next video coming your way soon. Cheers.